The alarm did not sound like an alarm. It sounded like a scream trapped inside metal walls, rising and falling as red light poured through the corridor. I was already running before my mind caught up with my legs, bare feet slapping against cold steel, my lungs burning with every breath. I am Ash Calder, and 3 minutes ago I was a prisoner in a cell with no name, only a number burned into a collar around my neck. Now I was free, and freedom on this ship was more dangerous than the cell had ever been. Behind me, I heard the clicking of claws on metal. Fast, too fast. The Vrashk did not walk, they scuttled, and when they scuttled toward you, it meant they had already decided you were finished. I did not plan to prove them right. I turned a corner and pressed my back against a cold wall, chest heaving, listening. The ship groaned around me, a living thing built from dead ambition, stretching for what felt like miles in every direction. I had counted 4 decks so far. I had counted at least 3 different alien voices shouting orders in languages my mind could not translate, only fear could. 6 months ago, I would have called this impossible. A human, alone, deep inside a vessel crewed by 3 different alien powers who hated each other almost as much as they hated my entire species. But 6 months ago, I still believed the old stories, the ones that said humanity was small and quiet and beaten. I do not believe those stories anymore. I risked a glance around the corner. 2 guards, reptilian and broad-shouldered, stood near a sealed door, weapons raised, scales catching the red emergency light like wet stone. I ducked back before they saw me, my mind already working through what I remembered of the ship's layout, memorized in scraps during the days I spent chained in a cargo hold, listening, always listening, because listening was the only freedom they could not take from me. There was a maintenance shaft 2 doors down. I had seen it once, when they dragged me past it in restraints, and some part of me, some quiet, stubborn part that refused to stop planning even in chains, had marked it as an escape route. I moved fast and low, ignoring the ache in my ribs where a guard's baton had struck me earlier, ignoring the dryness in my throat, ignoring everything except the next 5 seconds, because in the next 5 seconds I would either be free or I would be caught, and I had already decided which one I preferred. The shaft door slid open under my hands with a groan loud enough to make my heart stop. I froze, waiting for shouts, for the thunder of claws rushing toward the sound. Nothing came. I slipped inside and pulled the door shut behind me, the darkness swallowing me whole, and for the first time since I woke up in that cell, I allowed myself one single breath of relief. It did not last long. A voice, faint and strange, brushed against the edge of my mind. Not spoken, not heard with my ears. Felt, the way you feel a shift in air pressure before a storm. I froze again, every muscle tight, waiting for pain, waiting for capture, waiting for the trap I was certain this had to be. Nothing happened. The feeling faded, like a whisper carried away by wind, leaving only a strange, lingering warmth behind it, as if something curious had looked at me and then looked away. I told myself it was exhaustion. I told myself it was fear playing games with my mind. I did not yet know that somewhere on this ship, someone had just felt me for the very first time, and had not been able to look away since. I crawled through the shaft for what felt like an hour, though it was probably only minutes. My elbows and knees scraped raw against the metal grating. Pipes hissed steam beside my head. Wires buzzed with electricity close enough to make my hair stand on end. Twice, I had to stop and press myself flat as heavy footsteps passed beneath a grate above me. Alien voices barking commands I could not understand but could certainly guess the meaning of. Find the human. Kill the human. I had heard those words, in one form or another, in every language on this ship. When the shaft finally opened into a wider space, I found myself looking down into what must have once been a storage bay, now stripped bare and converted into something else entirely. Crates were stacked against the walls, and cables ran across the floor toward a bank of old monitors, most of them dark, one flickering weakly with static. I dropped down as quietly as I could and pressed myself into shadow, watching, waiting, listening for any sign that I was not alone. My mind kept circling back to that strange whisper in the shaft, and a cold unease settled into my stomach. On a ship crewed by insectoid soldiers and reptilian enforcers, a whisper in the mind could only mean one thing: the third faction, the quiet ones, the ones nobody talked about without lowering their voice first. The Ashari. I had heard stories about them back on Earth, before Earth stopped mattering to people who told stories. Psychic, manipulative, cold. The kind of enemy you could not fight with your fists, because your fists were useless against something that could climb inside your skull and rearrange what it found there. If one of them was on this ship, and if one of them had felt me in that shaft, then I was in more danger than I had ever been in my life, and that was saying something, because my entire life for the last several months had been one long exercise in surviving danger. I forced myself to move. Standing still was death, whether it came from claws or mines. I crept along the edge of the storage bay, keeping to the shadows, my eyes scanning every corner for movement. That was when I saw her. She was pressed into a gap between two crates, small and still, wearing a plain gray garment that marked her as some kind of laborer or servant rather than a soldier. Her skin held a faint silver sheen beneath the dim light, and her eyes, when they met mine, were pale gold, wide with something that looked almost like shock. I froze. She froze. For a long moment neither of us moved, two creatures caught in the same trap, staring at each other across a gap of only a few feet, each one waiting to see what the other would do. I should have run. I should have treated her exactly the way I treated every other alien on this ship, as a threat to be avoided or removed. But something in the way she looked at me stopped me cold. There was no hatred there, no command waiting to be given. Only a kind of stunned, wondering curiosity, the way you might look at something you had been told was a myth, right before it proved itself real in front of you. A shout rang out from somewhere above us, distant but close enough to send a fresh jolt of fear through my chest. Footsteps, heavy and fast, moving in our direction. The girl's eyes flicked toward the sound, then back to me, and in that instant, something passed between us that I still cannot fully explain. Not words, not quite thoughts, something closer to instinct, or maybe warning. She pointed, quick and small, toward a narrow gap behind the crates I had not noticed, a space just barely large enough for a person to slip through, leading toward a service corridor beyond. I did not trust her. I did not have time to decide whether to trust her. I moved, ducking low, sliding through the gap just as the footsteps grew loud enough to shake dust from the ceiling above. I pressed myself against the far wall of the narrow passage and held my breath, listening as heavy boots and scraping claws filled the storage bay I had just left. Voices barked questions in two different languages. I heard crates being shoved aside, heard something metal clatter to the floor, heard a long, tense silence that stretched out until my lungs burned from holding my breath too long. Then, finally, the footsteps retreated, the voices fading back into the distance, and the storage bay fell silent once more. I waited a long time before I dared to move again. When I finally crept back to the gap in the crates, the girl was gone, as if she had never been there at all. Only a faint impression remained in my mind, a lingering warmth, a question left unanswered. I told myself it did not matter. I told myself she was just another stranger, on a ship full of strangers, who wanted me dead, and whatever strange curiosity had crossed her face meant nothing, changed nothing, and I would be wise to forget it entirely and focus only on survival. I did not know yet how wrong I was. I spent the next hour moving through service corridors, avoiding patrols by instinct and luck in equal measure, my mind slowly building a clearer picture of the ship around me. It was larger than I had realized, built from salvaged sections of at least two other vessels, patched together with mismatched metal and tangled wiring that spoke of a crew more interested in function than comfort. 3 factions, 3 sets of soldiers who did not trust each other any more than they trusted me. I could use that. I had already started to use that, letting confusion and suspicion do half my work for me, letting guards blame each other for doors left open and patrols that mysteriously wandered off course. But eventually, My luck ran out. I turned a corner into a wide junction and found myself face to face with 4 Vrashk soldiers, their weapons already raised, their multiple eyes fixed on me with the kind of hungry satisfaction that told me they had been hunting for hours and were more than ready to be finished hunting. There was no shaft to escape into, no gap in the crates to slip through, only a long corridor behind me and 4 armed soldiers in front of me, blocking the only way forward. I could have surrendered. Some quiet, exhausted part of my mind whispered that surrender might buy me time, might buy me a chance to run again later. But I had made a promise to myself the moment I woke up in that cell, chained and numbered like an animal, and it was a promise I intended to keep, no matter what it cost me. I would not go back into a cage, not while I still had legs to run and a mind to think and hands to fight with, even against odds that made fighting look like madness. The first soldier stepped forward, weapon raised, voice hissing something in a language I did not understand, but did not need to understand, because the meaning was obvious in the way its claws tightened around the grip of its weapon. I planted my feet, raised my hands, and refused to look away. Whatever happened next, I would meet it standing, alone, unwilling to yield, because somewhere deep inside me, buried beneath the fear and the exhaustion and the ache of every bruise the last few months had given me, there was a stubborn ember that refused to go out. They thought they were hunting a single frightened prisoner. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. And somewhere else on that ship, hidden behind crates and silence, a girl with pale gold eyes sat with her knees pulled to her chest, her mind still tingling with the echo of a stranger's fierce, unbroken will, wondering why her chest felt so strange, and why, for the first time in her entire life, she found herself hoping that a human would somehow, impossibly, survive. The first soldier lunged, and I moved before thought caught up with instinct, sliding low beneath the swing of its weapon, driving my shoulder into its knee joint with every ounce of strength my legs could give. It buckled with a screech of surprise, and I was already moving past it, grabbing a length of loose cable from the wall and wrapping it hard around the next soldier's weapon arm, yanking with everything I had until the weapon clattered uselessly to the floor. The corridor became chaos. Bodies pressed close in the narrow space, and I used that closeness against them, keeping them tangled with each other, never letting more than one soldier find a clear line to strike at me at once. It was not skill, so much as desperation shaped into something that looked like skill, every movement fueled by a single thought. I would not be caged again. A blow caught my side and drove the breath from my lungs, but I twisted with the impact instead of against it, using the momentum to slam my elbow into the soldier's shoulder, feeling the satisfying shudder of contact ripple down my arm. I did not stop to consider the result. I could not afford to stop for anything. By the time I broke free of the junction, 3 of the 4 soldiers were sprawled across the floor, groaning, disarmed, and thoroughly confused about how a single unarmed prisoner had managed to leave them there. The 4th had fled, shouting something into a communicator, and I knew that meant my time in this section of the ship had just run out. I ran, my body aching with every step, my mind racing through the layout I had memorized, searching for anywhere I could disappear before reinforcements arrived. I found a narrow stairwell and took it 2 steps at a time, climbing until my legs burned, until I finally stumbled into a dim, abandoned section of the ship where dust coated every surface and the lights had long since failed. I collapsed against a wall, chest heaving, and allowed myself exactly 10 seconds to feel the fear catch up with me. Then I pushed it down, because fear was a luxury I could not afford. Not yet. Not while I was still alone against everyone on this ship. Alone. That word kept circling back to me, heavier each time. Except, I realized slowly, as I sat there in the dark trying to steady my breathing, I was not entirely sure that was true anymore. Doors had opened for me that should have been locked. A patrol had wandered off course at exactly the moment I needed it to, and somewhere in a storage bay, a strange girl with pale gold eyes had pointed me toward an escape route instead of raising an alarm. None of it made sense unless someone, somewhere on this ship, was helping me, And if that was true, I needed to know why, because on a ship full of enemies, unexplained help was just as dangerous as unexplained hostility. I spent that night, if night meant anything aboard a ship drifting through the emptiness between stars, moving carefully through abandoned sections, resting only when exhaustion forced me to, eating scraps of preserved rations I found in a forgotten supply locker. My body ached everywhere. My mind refused to rest, replaying the fight, replaying the strange girl's face, replaying that whisper of presence I had felt in the maintenance shaft. The next day, or what I assumed was the next day based on the ship's dim lighting cycles, I began moving again, more cautious than before, my ears straining for every sound that might mean danger. That was when the luck started again. I came to a junction with two paths, one leading toward what I guessed was a heavily patrolled section near the ship's command deck, the other leading deeper into maintenance areas I had already partially explored. I paused, uncertain which way to go, weighing risk against reward. A soft sound reached me then, faint, almost imagined, like a voice carried on wind from very far away. Left, just that single impression, pressed gently against the edge of my thoughts, not a command, more like a suggestion offered with quiet uncertainty. I hesitated only a moment before choosing left, telling myself it was simple caution, telling myself I would have chosen that path anyway. But when I rounded the corner and found the corridor beyond completely clear, while sounds of shouting and alarm rang out faintly from the direction I had not taken, I could no longer pretend the timing was coincidence. Someone was guiding me, and whoever it was, they were doing it without ever showing themselves. Over the following days, the pattern repeated. A door I needed unlocked would hiss open just as I reached it. A guard stationed somewhere I needed to pass would suddenly receive orders to report elsewhere, grumbling about wasted time as they left their post. Twice, I found supplies left in unlikely places, a ration bar tucked behind a loose panel, a length of usable cable coiled neatly where I would be sure to find it. I began talking to the empty air around me, quietly, almost embarrassed, because some stubborn part of me refused to believe I was simply talking to myself. "I know you are there," I said once, crouched in a maintenance alcove, my voice barely more than a whisper. "I do not know why you are helping me, but thank you." No answer came, not in words, but I felt something shift in the quiet, a kind of startled attention, as though whoever was listening had not expected me to notice them, let alone address them directly. I did not know it then, but at that exact moment, on a different level of the ship, sealed away in cramped quarters meant for laborers and translators, a girl named Sevi pressed her hand against her own chest, feeling her heart race in a way she had never experienced before, startled and thrilled and uneasy all at once that the strange, fierce, unbroken creature she had been secretly protecting had somehow sensed her presence. Sevi had been taken from her homeworld years earlier, when her people's council struck an uneasy alliance with forces far more powerful than themselves, an alliance built entirely on fear rather than trust. She had grown up believing certain truths without ever questioning them. Humans were dangerous, humans were unpredictable, humans had to be contained or removed before their reckless nature could threaten the fragile order the galaxy's stronger powers had built. She had believed those truths completely, right up until the moment she felt my mind for the first time in that maintenance shaft, and instead of the chaotic, hateful presence she expected to find, she found something else entirely: grief for a lost home, loneliness so deep it ached, and beneath all of it, a fierce, burning refusal to give up, no matter what stood in the way. It had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. It had also made her curious in a way that unsettled her far more than any human ever could have. She began watching through the ship's damaged surveillance systems, the ones her position as a translator gave her limited access to monitor and repair. At first, she told herself she was simply observing a threat, gathering information that might prove useful later. But somewhere along the way, observation turned into something closer to concern, and concern turned into action. Small nudges here and there, doors unlocked, guards redirected, all carefully hidden behind plausible malfunctions and coincidences. She had never done anything like it before in her life. Everything about it frightened her, and yet, every time she watched me survive against odds that should have overwhelmed me completely, something in her chest tightened with an emotion she did not yet have a name for. Back aboard the ship, unaware of exactly how close I had come to uncovering her identity, I continued moving through the maze of corridors, growing bolder with each small victory. Each guard I evaded, each patrol I slipped past unnoticed. The three factions aboard the ship had begun turning their suspicion toward each other, exactly as I had hoped, each group convinced that rival soldiers were responsible for their repeated failures to catch me. I overheard fragments of arguments through thin walls and open vents. Sharp accusations exchanged between reptilian officers and insectoid commanders, each side certain the other was either incompetent or secretly working against them. I did nothing to correct their assumptions. Confusion was a weapon just as useful as any blade, and I intended to use every weapon available to me. Still, the strange sense of being helped never left me, and it gnawed at the edges of my mind no matter how hard I tried to focus only on survival. I needed to know who was helping me, and more importantly, I needed to know why, because gratitude aboard a ship full of enemies was a luxury that could easily become a trap. The opportunity to find out came on the fifth day, when I found myself cornered near an old cargo bay, alarms blaring somewhere in the distance, my only escape route, sealed by a heavy door I had no way to force open on my own. I pressed my hands against the cold metal, my mind racing, my breath coming quick and shallow, and for the first time since my escape began, I felt genuine despair creeping into the edges of my thoughts. Then, impossibly, the door hissed open. I stumbled through the opening into the cargo bay beyond, spinning around just in time to see the door seal shut behind me, cutting off the sound of approaching footsteps. My heart pounded as I turned to face the empty space around me, crates stacked high on either side, shadows pooling thick in every corner. "I am not alone," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the fear still coursing through my veins. "I know you are here. I have known for days." Silence answered me at first, long enough that I began to wonder if I had simply lost my mind entirely, talking to shadows that held nothing but dust and old cargo. Then, slowly, from behind a tall stack of crates near the far wall, a figure stepped into the dim light. It was her, the girl with pale gold eyes and silver-touched skin, the same one I had glimpsed briefly during my first hours of freedom. She stood with her hands clasped tightly in front of her, shoulders tense, as though bracing herself for a reaction she fully expected to receive. I did not move toward her. I simply stood there, studying her, my mind spinning with questions I did not know how to ask. "Why," I finally managed, my voice rough with exhaustion. "Why are you helping me?" She hesitated for a long moment, her pale eyes searching my face, as though looking for something she was not entirely certain she would find. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, careful, shaped by an accent I had never heard before, each word chosen with obvious effort. "Because I felt you," she said quietly, "and I have never felt anything like you before in my entire life." Her words hung in the air between us, strange and honest, in a way that caught me completely off guard. I had expected excuses, or demands, or some kind of trap disguised as kindness. I had not expected simple, unguarded truth. "I do not trust easily," I told her, keeping my voice steady even as exhaustion pulled at every part of me. "Where I come from, help usually comes with a price attached." She flinched slightly at that, as though the words had struck somewhere tender, and for a moment I regretted my bluntness. Then she straightened her shoulders and met my eyes directly, something firm settling into her expression. "I do not want anything from you," she said. "I only wanted you to survive. I still do." I studied her carefully, searching for any sign of deception, any hint that this was some elaborate scheme designed to lower my guard before delivering me back into captivity. I found nothing but quiet sincerity, and something else beneath it, a kind of loneliness that mirrored my own more closely than I wanted to admit. "Sevi," she said suddenly, before I could ask. "My name is Sevi. I thought you should know, since you have been talking to me for days without knowing who you were talking to." "Ash," I replied after a brief hesitation. Ash Calder. The name seemed to settle something in her, as though attaching a word to the presence she had been protecting made everything more real, more solid, harder to walk away from. She glanced toward the sealed door behind me, worry flickering across her features. "We do not have much time," she said. "The soldiers you fought will report failure, and the officers will grow more careful. I can still help you, but only if you trust me enough to let me." I weighed her words carefully, every instinct honed by months of captivity screaming caution, while some quieter, more desperate part of me recognized that I had already been trusting her without realizing it. Every time I followed her unseen guidance through locked doors and "Show me I can trust you." She nodded, and over the following hours, she did exactly that. Using her limited access to the ship's damaged systems, she guided me toward a maintenance terminal, hidden deep within the cargo bay, one she claimed still held partial control over certain ship functions the officers had not yet managed to fully secure. Together, crouched over flickering screens and tangled wiring, we began to piece together a clearer picture of the ship's vulnerabilities. Sevi's knowledge of the vessel's systems, gained through years of forced servitude as a translator and technician, combined with my understanding of tactics and deception in ways that surprised us both. "You think strangely," she told me once, watching as I sketched out a plan involving false signals and misdirected patrols. "Your people plan around uncertainty, around tricking enemies rather than simply overwhelming them. My people were never taught to think this way." "Is that a compliment?" I asked, allowing myself a small, tired smile despite everything. "It is an observation," she replied, though something in her expression suggested it was closer to admiration than she wanted to admit aloud. As the hours passed, I learned more about her, fragments offered hesitantly at first, then more freely, as trust slowly built between us. She spoke of a homeworld she barely remembered, taken from her family as a child, to serve as tribute in an alliance her people had been too weak to refuse. She spoke of a life built entirely around obedience, around suppressing anything resembling personal desire or ambition, because desire and ambition were dangerous traits in a species valued only for its usefulness to more powerful masters. "I did not know humans could feel this way," she admitted quietly, staring down at her hands. "So much anger, so much grief, and still so much refusal to give up. My people are taught to accept what cannot be changed. You are not. We are stubborn," I told her, "sometimes to a fault, but that stubbornness has kept my species alive through worse than this." She looked at me then with an expression I did not fully understand yet, something caught between fascination and quiet longing, as though she was seeing not just a dangerous prisoner, but a possibility she had never allowed herself to imagine before. Our alliance solidified that night, though I still held pieces of myself back, unwilling to fully surrender the caution that had kept me alive this long. Together, we began planning something far more ambitious than simple survival. If confusion between the three factions had helped me evade capture so far, then real, engineered chaos might do far more than that. It might give me an actual chance at reclaiming control of the ship, or at the very least, escaping it entirely. Sevi identified a critical weakness in the ship's aging reactor systems, a section of the vessel patched together hastily from salvaged parts that had never been properly integrated with the rest of the ship's network. With careful manipulation, she believed she could trigger cascading failures that would appear, to each faction, as sabotage committed by their rivals. "It is dangerous," she warned me, her pale eyes serious. "If the reactor fails completely, we will be caught in the chaos as much as they will." "I have been in danger since the moment I woke up in that cell," I told her. "This is simply a different kind." We spent the following day preparing carefully, moving through the ship's less traveled sections, avoiding patrols with a precision that felt almost effortless now that Sevi's guidance came directly rather than through unseen whispers. She showed me overlooked maintenance routes, forgotten storage compartments, sections of the ship even the current crew had apparently never fully mapped. Along the way, I watched her grow more confident, less like a frightened servant hiding in shadows, and more like someone rediscovering a strength she had been taught to bury deep inside herself. It was a transformation I found myself admiring more than I expected to, though I kept that observation carefully to myself. "You keep looking at me strangely," she said at one point, catching my gaze as we paused in a narrow corridor to check for patrols. "You keep surprising me," I admitted. "I did not expect any of this. Not the help, not you." She looked away, something unreadable crossing her expression, though I noticed the faint tension in her shoulders ease slightly, as though my words had settled something uncertain inside her. We reached the maintenance access point near the reactor section late into what the ship's dim cycles called night. Sevi worked quickly and quietly, her fingers moving across an old control panel with practiced precision, rerouting signals, disabling alarms, preparing everything needed to set our plan into motion. I stood watch nearby, senses alert for any sign of approaching danger, my mind replaying everything that had led me to this moment. Weeks ago, I had been a prisoner with no name, chained in darkness, certain my story would end quietly and unnoticed in some forgotten corner of alien space. Now I stood beside an ally I never expected to find, preparing to strike back against three separate powers who believed they had already won. "It is ready," Sevi said finally, stepping back from the panel, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and quiet determination. "Once I trigger this, the reactor will begin showing signs of failure within each faction's monitored systems simultaneously. They will each believe the others are responsible, and chaos does the rest," I finished for her. She nodded, though her eyes lingered on me a moment longer than necessary, something soft and uncertain flickering behind her pale gold gaze. "Whatever happens next," she said quietly, "I am glad I felt you that day in the shaft. I am glad I did not look away. I did not have an answer ready for that, some strange warmth spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with fear or exhaustion." Before I could find the right words, she turned back to the panel and pressed the final sequence into place. Alarms began blaring throughout the ship almost immediately, distant at first, then growing louder as confusion spread rapidly through every level. I heard shouted orders in 3 different languages, each faction scrambling to respond to a crisis they believed had been deliberately caused by their rivals. "This is it," I said, adrenaline surging through my veins as the ship trembled faintly beneath our feet. "Whatever happens now, we see it through together." Sevi met my eyes, something fierce and determined replacing the earlier uncertainty in her expression, and for the first time since this entire ordeal began, I did not feel entirely alone. "Together," I repeated quietly, and she nodded once, firm and certain. We moved quickly through the trembling corridors, chaos erupting around us exactly as planned, soldiers from every faction rushing past each other in confused, frightened groups, each one convinced their rivals had betrayed the fragile alliance holding them together. It was working better than either of us had dared to hope. But even as relief threatened to take hold, some instinct deep inside me refused to fully relax, a quiet warning whispering that we had only won a single battle in a war that was far from finished. Somewhere aboard this ship, the true commanders would eventually see through the chaos, and when they did, their fury would fall upon whoever they suspected of causing it. I only hoped Sevi and I would be ready when that moment finally arrived. Word of the reactor crisis spread through the ship faster than either of us anticipated, and with it came something we had not fully planned for. Instead of turning entirely against each other, the frightened commanders of all 3 factions began exchanging urgent, suspicious messages, each one demanding answers the others could not honestly provide. We heard it through a damaged communication relay Sevi managed to tap into, voices layered with static, arguing in clipped, tense tones. None of them believed the failures were accidental. All of them suspected sabotage. And slowly, horribly, a new theory began circulating among the ship's leadership, one that turned their scattered suspicion into something far more focused and far more dangerous. "They believe a single agent is responsible," Sevi whispered, her fingers frozen over the relay controls, her expression tightening with concern. They think someone, or something, has been deliberately working against all three factions at once. They are half right, I said grimly. They just have not realized yet that Agent is not some hidden enemy commander. It is a single unarmed prisoner and one very resourceful translator. Sevi's eyes met mine, and I saw the same realization dawning in her expression that had already settled cold and heavy in my own chest. If the factions stopped fighting each other long enough to combine their efforts, even temporarily, hunting us down would become infinitely more difficult. We do not have much time before they organize a coordinated search, she said. Once they compare notes properly, they will realize their patrols have all reported similar patterns. Doors mysteriously opening, guards mysteriously redirected. It will not take them long to suspect there is inside interference rather than open rebellion. Then we move faster than they can organize, I replied, already running through options in my mind. We use the confusion while it still exists, and we make sure that by the time they figure out what is happening, it no longer matters. Over the following hours, tension aboard the ship grew thick enough to feel it pressing against every wall we passed. Soldiers moved in tighter, more coordinated groups now, no longer simply patrolling but actively searching, checking identification, questioning anyone who seemed even slightly out of place. Sevi and I moved carefully, using every trick her system access and my growing familiarity with the ship's layout could provide, but the net was closing, regardless of how carefully we moved. It came to a head near what Sevi identified as the ship's central control hub, a heavily fortified section none of us had dared approach until now. It was there, according to information she managed to extract from a partially unsecured terminal, that the leaders of all three factions had gathered together, forced by circumstance into an uneasy meeting none of them wanted, united only by their shared determination to end whatever threat was disrupting their fragile alliance. If we could reach that hub, Sevi believed, we might find a way to disable enough of the ship's systems to cripple their coordinated efforts entirely, buying enough time and confusion for a genuine chance at escape. It is heavily guarded, she warned, studying the schematics glowing faintly on a cracked screen. More guarded than anything else on this ship. If we are caught there, there will be no room left to run. Then we make sure we are not caught, I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I understood exactly how difficult that promise would be to keep. We approached the hub through a service corridor, Sevi remembered from her early days as a translator, narrow and poorly maintained, but far less guarded than the main approaches. Even so, we encountered resistance almost immediately, soldiers stationed at intervals along the passage, alert and clearly expecting trouble after the chaos of the past day. I will not pretend the confrontations that followed were easy or bloodless. Every step forward came at a cost. Every guard we bypassed or subdued, leaving my body more battered, my reserves of strength stretched thinner than I wanted to admit. Sevi proved braver than I expected, using her limited abilities to create small distractions, brief flickers of misdirection that bought precious seconds when we needed them most, though I could see clearly how much each attempt drained her, how unfamiliar and frightening this kind of active resistance was for someone raised entirely around obedience and restraint. By the time we reached the final approach to the control hub, both of us were exhausted, breathing hard, moving on willpower alone, rather than any remaining physical reserves. The heavy door leading into the hub loomed ahead, flanked by two alert guards who had clearly not yet been drawn away by the chaos elsewhere. "This is where it matters most," Sevi said quietly, her voice steady despite the exhaustion evident in every line of her posture. "Whatever happens beyond this door will decide everything." "I know," I told her, meeting her eyes directly. "Stay close. Trust your instincts. We finish this together." She nodded, and together we moved forward, using the last of our carefully gathered advantages to slip past the guards and breach the entrance to the control hub itself. Inside, the scene was chaotic in an entirely different way. Officers from all three factions gathered around damaged control panels, shouting conflicting orders, none of them fully in command of a situation none of them fully understood. Sevi moved immediately toward an auxiliary station, working frantically to redirect what remained of the ship's compromised systems, while I positioned myself to intercept anyone who noticed us before she finished. It did not take long before someone did. A reptilian officer turned, eyes widening in recognition and fury, as he spotted me across the chaotic room, and within seconds, every remaining soldier in the hub turned their attention toward us, weapons rising, voices rising into a furious chorus of alarm. I had faced impossible odds before during this entire ordeal, but never quite like this. Never with so many enemies converging at once. Every faction momentarily united by a single shared target. Sevi's hands moved faster across the console, sweat beading on her brow, while I positioned myself between her and the advancing soldiers, refusing to let them reach her before her work was finished. What followed was the hardest struggle of my life, every movement calculated, every dodge and block drawn from instincts sharpened by weeks of desperate survival. I used the cramped space of the control hub against them, keeping their numbers from ever fully surrounding me, using discarded equipment and damaged consoles as cover and improvised weapons in equal measure. Sevi, for her part, surprised everyone in that room, myself included, by finally breaking through whatever restraint her upbringing had instilled in her, using her abilities not just for subtle misdirection, but for something far more direct, disrupting the perceptions of soldiers closing in on my position, buying me precious seconds again and again when I needed them most. "I am not supposed to do this," she gasped at one point, her voice strained with effort I could see costing her dearly. "My people are forbidden from using our gifts this way." "Then it is a good thing you stopped listening to what your people forbid," I called back, ducking beneath a strike and driving my opponent backward with everything I had left. Slowly, impossibly, the tide within that control hub began to shift, not because I had somehow become stronger than an entire room full of trained soldiers, but because Sevi's growing confidence, combined with careful, desperate strategy, began to overwhelm their coordination faster than their superior numbers could compensate for. Finally, with a triumphant cry that startled even herself, Sevi completed her work at the console, and the lights throughout the control hub flickered and died, plunging the room into near total darkness broken only by scattered emergency lighting and the frantic shouts of soldiers suddenly blind and disoriented. "Now," she called out to me, her voice carrying clearly despite the chaos. "Move now." I did not need to be told twice. Grabbing her hand, I pulled her toward the nearest exit, the two of us stumbling together through the darkened corridor beyond, leaving behind a control hub in complete disarray, its systems crippled, its soldiers scattered and confused. We ran until our legs could carry us no further, finally collapsing together in a narrow, hidden alcove far from the chaos we had left behind, chests heaving, bodies aching, hearts pounding from exertion and lingering fear. For a long moment, neither of us spoke, simply breathing together in the darkness, the adrenaline of the fight slowly draining away and leaving something quieter and more fragile in its place. "We did it," I finally said, still struggling to fully believe it myself. Sevi turned to look at me, her pale gold eyes catching what little light remained in our hiding place, an expression on her face I had never seen from her before, something soft and vulnerable and entirely unguarded. "You did it," she corrected quietly. "I only helped." "You did far more than that," I told her, meaning every word completely. She studied me for a long moment, something building silently behind her expression, some decision forming that I could see costing her considerable courage to finally voice aloud. "Ash," she said softly, my name unfamiliar yet careful on her tongue. "I need to tell you something, and I do not fully understand it myself, but I cannot keep it silent any longer." I waited, my heart suddenly beating for reasons that had nothing to do with our narrow escape. "I want him to be mine," she whispered, so quietly I almost missed it entirely, her eyes never leaving mine. "Not as property, not as something owned, but as someone I choose, freely, completely, for exactly who he is." The words settled between us in the darkness, fragile and enormous all at once, and for the first time since I had woken up in that cell so many days ago, I found myself utterly speechless, staring at the strange, remarkable creature beside me, wondering how something so unexpected could feel so completely, impossibly right. I did not have words ready for what she had just given me, so instead I reached out slowly and took her hand in mine, feeling her fingers tremble slightly before tightening around my own. Neither of us spoke for a long while, sitting together in that narrow, hidden alcove, listening to the distant echoes of chaos still unfolding throughout the ship, both of us simply grateful to still be breathing, still be together, still be alive. We could not stay hidden forever, though. Eventually, the factions aboard the ship would regroup, their leaders furious and humiliated, more determined than ever to hunt down whoever had humiliated them so thoroughly. Sevi and I both understood this without needing to say it aloud, and after allowing ourselves a brief, precious moment of stillness, we rose together and began moving once more, planning our next steps with renewed determination. Word of what had happened in the control hub spread rapidly through every level of the ship, exaggerated and distorted with each retelling, until soldiers from every faction began whispering about a single, unstoppable presence tearing through their defenses. Some called me a ghost, others called me something far less kind. I did not care what name they gave me, only that fear of that name was beginning to work in our favor, making soldiers hesitant, cautious, less willing to charge blindly into any corridor where I might be waiting. Sevi and I used that fear carefully over the following days, striking small, calculated blows against the ship's remaining infrastructure, disabling weapons caches, disrupting communication relays, always moving before the factions could properly organize a response. Each small victory bought us more time, more confusion among our enemies, and more confidence in ourselves. But we both knew this could not continue indefinitely. Eventually, exhaustion or simple bad luck would catch up with us, and when the leaders of all three factions finally set aside their remaining suspicions of each other long enough to mount one final, coordinated effort, we would need to be ready for a confrontation far larger than anything we had faced before. That moment arrived on what Sevi calculated to be our 8th day of resistance, when every remaining soldier aboard the ship, regardless of faction, was pulled together into a single massive search operation, sweeping methodically through every level, every corridor, every hidden compartment, determined to finally end the disruption that had cost them so dearly. We felt the net tightening around us long before we saw it directly, patrols growing denser with every passing hour, escape routes we had relied upon suddenly blocked or heavily guarded. By the time we retreated toward the ship's oldest, most damaged section, the same abandoned area where I had first found refuge after my escape, we both understood that this would likely be where everything finally came to a head. "They are gathering everyone," Sevi said quietly, monitoring what remained of the ship's compromised systems from a hidden terminal. "This is not a patrol anymore. This is everyone they have left." "Then we make sure it counts for nothing," I replied, already surveying the abandoned section around us, my mind working quickly through every advantage this familiar territory might offer us. Together, we spent our remaining hours preparing as thoroughly as exhaustion and limited resources allowed, rigging improvised traps throughout the maze of corridors, positioning ourselves carefully to maximize the confusion and disadvantage of any force attempting to corner us here. Sevi's growing confidence in her abilities proved invaluable, her mind reaching out cautiously to sense approaching soldiers long before they came within sight, giving us precious warning every single time. When the assault finally came, it arrived in overwhelming numbers, soldiers from every faction pouring into the abandoned section from multiple directions at once, their commanders clearly determined to end this confrontation decisively, no matter the cost. For a moment, staring at the sheer scale of the force arrayed against us, I felt something close to despair creeping back into my thoughts. Then I felt Sevi's hand find mine in the darkness, steady and certain despite everything, and that despair could not take hold. "We are not facing this alone," she said firmly, as though reading the doubt directly from my mind. "Whatever happens, we face it together." "Together," I agreed, "and together we move to meet the coming storm." What followed was chaos unlike anything I had experienced during this entire ordeal. Soldiers pouring through corridors rigged with every trap we could improvise, confusion and misdirection working exactly as we had hoped, turning what should have been an overwhelming numerical advantage into a disorganized, stumbling mess. I fought with everything remaining in me, every lesson learned across days of desperate survival, converging into something that felt, for the first time, less like desperate improvisation and more like genuine mastery. Sevi fought beside me the entire time, her abilities growing bolder and more confident with each passing minute, disrupting enemy coordination, sensing danger before it arrived, protecting my back exactly as fiercely as I protected hers. We moved together like something greater than the sum of our individual efforts, her mind and my instincts weaving together into a partnership neither of us could have imagined when this entire journey began. Slowly, impossibly, the tide of battle began to shift in our favor. Soldiers who entered the maze of corridors confident and organized emerged disoriented, injured, no longer certain of anything except that whatever force opposed them was far more dangerous than they had ever anticipated. Faction commanders, watching their forces crumble against a resistance they could not properly understand, began making increasingly desperate and uncoordinated decisions, further weakening whatever unified effort they had originally intended. By the time the fighting finally began to quiet, the abandoned section of the ship lay in ruins around us, but so too did the coordinated hunting effort that had brought so many soldiers against us in the first place. Faction forces retreated in disorganized groups, their leaders shouting contradictory orders, their alliance more fractured now than it had ever been before our resistance began. Sevi and I stood together amid the wreckage, breathing hard, bodies bruised and exhausted beyond anything either of us had experienced before, yet alive, and together, and finally, for the first time since this entire ordeal began, genuinely hopeful about what might come next. "It is over," Sevi said softly, disbelief evident in her voice as she surveyed the quiet devastation around us. "For now," I corrected gently, "but we are still here, and that is more than either of us had any right to expect." In the days that followed, word of what had happened aboard the ship spread far beyond its walls, carried by frightened soldiers eager to explain their failures to distant commanders, and by traders and travelers who passed along rumors of a single human and a rebellious translator who had brought 3 powerful factions to their knees. The story grew with every retelling, exaggerated and mythologized, until it barely resembled the exhausting, desperate reality Sevi and I had actually lived through. But within that growing legend, something real and lasting had taken root. Sevi made her choice known publicly, defying the expectations and restrictions her own people had placed upon her entire life, choosing openly to stand beside me rather than remain hidden in service to masters who had never once valued her as anything more than a useful tool. It was not an easy choice for her, and the consequences of it followed us for a long time afterward, her own people initially horrified by her defiance, other factions wary and suspicious of the bond between us. But slowly, through patience and persistence, what began as a desperate partnership forged in chaos and fear grew into something far more enduring, a genuine relationship built on mutual respect, shared struggle, and a trust neither of us had ever expected to find aboard that ship. I think back often to that first strange whisper I felt in the maintenance shaft, so many days ago, when I believed myself utterly alone against impossible odds. I did not know then that somewhere on that ship, a frightened girl with pale gold eyes had felt something in me worth protecting, something worth risking everything for, something she would eventually choose, freely and completely, to call her own. Humanity's road back into the wider galaxy did not begin with grand fleets or powerful weapons. It began quietly, aboard a single battered ship, with one stubborn, exhausted prisoner who refused to stop fighting, and one remarkable woman who dared to whisper, against everything she had ever been taught, that she wanted him to be hers. And in the end, that quiet, defiant choice proved far more powerful than any army either of us could have imagined.